The Old Iron Pot. Once there was a rich old man who lived in a beautiful house. He was by far the richest man in all the countryside, but he was also a greedy master. The people who worked for him were very poor, because he paid them small wages for their hard labor. And not far from the rich man's house there was a lowly cottage in which lived a poor old farmer and his wife. They had worked for the rich man for many years, but they had been able to save very little. One day, the farmer's wife said to her husband, "All our money is gone. The time has come for us to sell the cow." "Sell the cow?" exclaimed the old man, thinking he had not heard aright. "Why, what shall we do without milk?" "I don't know," answered the good wife, "but we must have a little money to live. The old cow should bring, perhaps $100. The old farmer's eyes brightened, and he said, "I'll drive her to market tomorrow morning." Early next morning, he started to market, leading the cow. "Be sure you get a good sum for her," his wife called out after him. "I'll do my best," he replied. The old man had not gone far along the highway when he met an odd-looking little man, who asked, "How much is your cow worth?" $100, I think," answered the old man. "I'll give you this kettle for her," said the stranger, holding up a three-legged iron pot which he carried on his arm. The old man looked very much surprised, and said, "That old pot is worth nothing to me." Then up spoke the iron pot, saying, "Take me, try me." When the old man heard the pot speak, he thought it surely must be a magic kettle. So he agreed to the bargain, and the exchange was made. But as the farmer returned to his cottage, he recalled his wife's parting words, "Be sure you get a good sum for her." "I'd better take the kettle to the barn," he thought. So he took it to the barn and tied it in the stall. Then he went into the cottage. "Did you sell the cow?" the old woman wanted to know. The husband nodded his head. Then he said, "Come to the bar and see what I have got." He led the way, carrying a lantern, and his wife followed. "Look in the stall," he said. At first the old woman was very much puzzled, and when she saw nothing in the stall but an old iron pot, she grew angry and said, "Surely you did not trade our cow for that?" Before the old man could answer, the iron pot spoke up and said, "Take me in and scour me bright, hang me over the firelight." "You see, it's a magic kettle," said the old man. "Let us do as it asks." So they took the kettle into the house and scoured it until it shone. The next morning the old woman hung it over the fire. Soon it became hot and cried out, "I skip, I skip, I skip." "Tell me where you skip," said the old woman. I skip as fast as I can. I skip to the house of the very rich man." Before the old wife could answer, the iron pot had bounded off the fire and jumped through an open window. She burst into a hearty laugh when she saw the little legs scampering down the road. Now the cook in the rich man's house was troubled. She had made a rich plum pudding for the dinner, but when she had tied it up in the pudding bag, she found it was too large to go into the pot. "What shall I do?" she said. "There's not a kettle in the kitchen large enough to hold the master's pudding." At that moment, through the open window and down upon the table jumped the old iron pot. "Try me," it cried out. "Indeed I will," said the cook, and she popped the pudding into the kettle. Then the kettle cried out, I skip, I skip, I skip." "Tell me where you skip," said the servant. I skip as fast as I can. I skip to the house of the very poor man." Before the cook could catch her breath, the old pot was hopping along the road again. The poor man's wife was wondering what she could get for dinner, when suddenly the iron pot jumped through the window and came to rest on the table. "Well," she said, "I see that the old pot has brought us a fine plum pudding." Then she called her husband for the meal. When the pudding was eaten, the wife scoured the kettle and set it on the fire. In a little while she heard it cry out, I skip, I skip, I skip." "Tell me where you skip," she said. I skip as fast as I can. I skip to the barn of the very rich man." Out of the window leaped the iron pot. The little legs pattered down the highway and across a meadow to the rich man's barn, where several men were threshing wheat. "What shall we put the grain in?" asked one of the men. "The sacks from the village have not come yet." "Here's an old iron pot," said another. The men began to fill the iron pot with the wheat, and soon the kettle held all the wheat the men had threshed. "I skip, I skip, I skip," cried the kettle. "Tell me where you skip," said a man. I skip, as fast as I can. I skip to the house of the very poor man." And out of the barn door leaped the old iron pot. It skipped over the meadow and down the highway to the poor man's house. With a great bound it went through the window and stood in the middle of the kitchen where the old woman was working. "Come and see what the old pot has brought us," the wife called to her husband. "Why, it's full of fine wheat," said the old man. "Let's empty it." "It will last us for a long time," the wife said as they poured out bushels of the wheat. The kettle was scoured again, as bright as silver, and set on the fire. Then, some mornings later, as the old couple were eating breakfast, the kettle again cried out, "I skip, I skip, I skip." "Where do you skip now?" they both asked, and the kettle answered, I skip, as fast as I can, to the counting house of the very rich man." With a great bound, the kettle leaped out of the window and pattered down the highway to the rich man's house. On just that morning, the rich man was in his counting house, where he kept all of his money. The table where he sat was covered with gold and silver coins. Suddenly, something leaped through the open window and bumped against the table. It was the old iron pot, of course. "Why, here's a good strong kettle," he said. "It will do very nicely to hold some of my gold and silver." He was surprised to find how much the old pot held, for indeed he was able to pack all of his coins in it. I skip, I skip," cried the kettle. The rich man jumped to his feet in alarm. Away leaped the kettle, out of the window and down the highway. It carried the money to the house of the poor man, who was standing in the kitchen. Now it was his turn to call his wife. "Come quickly and see what the old pot has brought us," he shouted. "Shining gold and silver. It's enough to last us to the end of our days." "Ah," said his wife, when she saw the bright coins, "what a bargain you struck when you traded the cow for this pot. Now it need never skip again." But as soon as all the money had been taken out of the kettle, the old man and his wife again heard it cry out, I skip, I skip, I skip." "And where do you skip now?" asked the old wife. But this time the pot did not stop to answer. It leaped out of the window and hurried down the highway. As it came down the road, the rich man's cook happened to see it, and promptly told her master about it. The rich man ran as fast as he could to meet the kettle. He threw his arms around it and cried, "I've caught you this time." But then the strangest thing happened. The handle of the iron pot wound itself around the rich man, tying him up. I skip, I skip, I skip," the kettle cried. Then off it started, dragging the rich man down the road to the poor man's cottage. This time it did not stop. When it passed the kitchen, the farmer's wife called out the window, "Please tell me where you skip." And the last words the kettle spoke as it carried off the greedy man were, I skip, I skip, I skip, as fast as I can, to the far North Pole with the very rich man."